On this episode of Deep in the D-Pad, we're going to be talking about the metaphysics of virtual reality.
More bitter at the fact that a game that combines these mechanics only comes once every 10 plus years.
Hello and welcome to Deep in the D-Pad, where we explore all things gaming through an intellectual lens. Today's episode, we're going to be getting philosophical. This episode is called The Metaphysics of Virtual Reality. I'm one of your hosts, RK Taylor, and with me is game developer Carlos Gutierrez.
Hello and welcome.
Carlos, before we begin getting deep in the D-Pad, do you have a D-Pad delight that you'd like to share? Perhaps something related to virtual reality?
Yes, I do. My D-Pad delight for this week will be the first time I tried the HTC Vive. I think this was maybe my first time trying consumer grade VR as we know today. So this was during my time working on Days Gone. One of my friends who was an engineer at Sony Bend, he is super into virtual reality and had the Oculus Rift DK1 development kit. And yeah, he was...
What year is this approximately?
Darn, that's a good question. Probably 2016-ish is my best guess.
Okay, that's early.
Yeah. So either early 2016, he was telling quite a few of us about the Vive, and we're like, whoa, we're seeing the lab and Vacation Simulator. Is it as crazy as it looks? And he we were in a kind of smaller studio space then, so he got whatever permissions he needed to bring in his base stations and set up his headset, and it was pretty sweet. It was a slow day at the studio that day, so I got to go over to his desk and hang around with a couple of engineers as we all tried VR for the first time. So some of us did the lab where we fired off a slingshot machine into different boxes, almost like Angry Birds, but you're using the personality cores from Portal as slingshot ammo. And also Audio Shield, that was a major thing. Audio Shield is this music rhythm game where a bunch of these colored orbs, they're either red or blue, like any other music rhythm game, they fly at you, and you need to use your red shield on your arm or your blue shield on your arm to block them in music rhythm order. So I played this with the Attack on Titan theme, and it was just so epic, so crazy, so in retrospect primitive, because you're literally you're standing in place and things are coming at you. That's I feel that's the most I feel that's the most basic VR. That's back in the day, when we tried to watch Spy Kids 3D, and they'd be put on your 3D glasses so I can shove my arm out 10 feet, and that's all they do.
It was gosh, I love that you brought that up. It was so obvious when they with things that were filmed in 3D or to be 3D, how they would just film angles that were so absurd, and you could I remember as a kid I would watch it and watch those movies, and I would see the parts. It would be something someone would blow dust, and then the dust would get in your eyes, kind of thing, and it would be there's no way that they would have used that shot if it weren't for the 3D, that they were trying to show off the 3D capabilities.
Yeah.
So silly. It's
they had the budget for 3D, and then they were nah, I don't think I want to make a 3D movie, but we agreed to it. So let's get this sawdust and blow on it.
Yeah, what can we slip in? Yeah,
hey, you, Ashley, just stick your arm towards the camera. We'll make it 3D. So Ryan, that pretty much blew my mind, first time using the Vive at work. What about you? What would be your D-Pad delight for this week?
Yeah, I think that is such a great story of yours, by the way, the Attack on Titan theme. I mean, it's just that is the most Carlos story. If there was one story that just encapsulated your essence, it would be that story. And I love thinking about you have a living memory of the first time that you experience virtual reality, and now you dedicate your life to creating virtual reality games. I think that's very, very neat. And you also showed me virtual reality, and that's my D-Pad delight is...
Oh, neat.
February of 2019, you visited New York, and I drove down and stayed at my mom's house for a few days, and you brought your Quest, and that was the first time I got to experience it, and you showed it to everybody in my family, and I got to play like a few different games, and it was super fun. I loved that tennis one. What was that called? The dome tennis game?
Oh yeah, Racket NX.
Racket NX. Oh gosh, that was so fun. I could just see myself like using that as like the workout, like working out with that for like the rest of my life. It was so engaging. But my favorite part was really when my mom put on the headset and my stepdad. They had very different reactions. My mom was like concerned for some reason. She was like really unsettled by being there, and she was also very hesitant too. We all kind of like pressured her into it, if you remember.
Yeah.
But it was just, they didn't even play games. They just looked at like the home base, like the apartment type setting, and you could see the skyline like through the windows, and you're like in this bougie apartment, and it just like looks so luxurious, and like you're in a penthouse basically. And my stepdad, who doesn't do anything video game related, was like so mesmerized by the experience, and seeing him in this like childlike state of awe where he's like experiencing kind of the new frontier of media, that was really exciting for me. I can't think of any other I can't think of any reaction that he has ever had that's similar to that. And then my mom, even though she was kind of like fearful of it, was still engaged, and I'm really glad that she got to experience that too, even if she never does it again, just so she can see what it's like. And I'm really grateful that you were able to like bring that over, and you were so generous with your like time and shared it with all of us. That was so dope.
Yeah, man. I mean, of course, I'm glad you all appreciated it. Like anything to spread the good word of virtual reality, honestly. That's awesome. I'm glad I could make such an impact on you and your family, and hopefully VR can enter your lives more later, but not in a dystopian leave the world in this headset way, more of a let's meet up on Tuesday and play Echo Arena type way.
And now let's get deeper into the D-pad. Just for people who haven't had any experience with metaphysics, I think that word might be intimidating for some people who have never, studied philosophy, or, maybe you've only come across that word in like superficial ways or haven't like looked into it too deeply. But just a quick overview of like the kinds of topics that would be covered in like a metaphysics course, let's say, right? There are things like philosophy of language, which might explore words like I, like how is it that I can mean the same thing to different people, and how do we derive meaning from a word that's seemingly indexical and changes depending on who's saying it, right? Or questions like in other language questions could be, what is the relationship between an utterance and the thing that it refers to, or is language in the mind, or is it external to the mind? Or that's one like corner of the metaphysics world. There's also questions of like personal identity, right? So like if you've ever heard of the Ship of Theseus thought experiment, that comes directly from metaphysics. The personal identity explores what makes a person consistent throughout their time span. Is it like the fact that is it something like mental? Like, is it the fact that their consciousness is linked, or does it have more to do with their physical body, and the fact that their cells will like replenish, and there will still be a continuous person in the physical space that they occupy that whole time. Things about space and time are also questions of metaphysics. And one of the biggest categories, and what I think we're going to be really getting into today, would be considered under the heading of like ontology. And that's really like the study of being. So questions of ontology are like, does heaven exist? Is there a soul? What kinds of things are real? What kinds of things are actually in existence and like fundamental? And what kinds of things are true? Things like, is there actually like a karmic scoreboard that where like the universe is keeping track of like who's good and who's bad? Those kinds of things are all under the metaphysics umbrella. And so I know that was like kind of like a heady intro to this topic, right? But I guess, Carlos, I know that you haven't like read any metaphysics. Does that all make sense? Do you feel like I'm missing anything? Do you have any questions before we jump into the actual virtual reality part of that?
Yeah, so this is definitely trying to speak deeply on metaphysics is definitely very new to me. So I will do the best I can, but I seem to understand it, and I also have a definition up here just to help me. So metaphysics, as I am reading it, is the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, which you mentioned. So this includes abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. These are all the different things, like you said, that come into us understanding and I guess ultimately accepting our reality. The reason this came up, listener, if you're wondering, like, how the hell do we get so deep into this D-pad so quickly, we literally were just like, hey, you know, it's kind of weird when you put on the headset for a bit for the first time and you come out of it, you almost question like if you could touch or phase through the world around you, you know, just a simple like fun VR novelty for like those who are newer. But then that led us on to this question of like, well, if putting on the headset for the first time for a little while can fuck with your idea of reality, what exactly goes into making reality, or what goes into us accepting that reality? And here we are at metaphysics.
Yeah, and for me, I feel like reality is a really loaded word. I've always been kind of attracted to theories of skepticism, and the idea of referring to it, even though it's qualified with the word virtual, reality just seems like such an intensely strong word to use, and I guess like it just doesn't sit very well with me, and I really want to explore what it like means in a virtual reality context. So I guess like to like jump into that, like when I'm referring to the skepticism, there are different like thought experiments in philosophy. One of them is like the brain in a vat, which is essentially like what if you were just like a brain that had like electrodes stimulating different parts of the brain, and this world that we're in is kind of like a simulated version of whatever's happening to that brain. You know, like what if you actually didn't have a body, and you were just that single organ being stimulated in a certain way. There's another one called the experience machine, which is similar to like a Matrix type world. But basically the idea is like this is super relevant to virtual reality. Essentially this came out decades ago. I think Robert Nozick is the philosopher who wrote this. So really quick, just some background. He's basically arguing about like ethics. So he's talking about utilitarianism, which is the idea that if we could maximize goodness, and you know, in like a hedonistic kind of way, right? They actually use the word hedons, which is like units of pleasure. If we could maximize hedons, then you know that a consequentialist would say that is morally good, right? So things are morally good if they result in them being pleasurable at the end. The primary counter to this would be like what's called deontological ethics, which is the belief that like we have deontology comes from the word duty based, and it's this idea that there are like kind of commandments that are like inviolable, and like we have a duty to not, like, let's say like lying, right? Could be a very simple example. Lying might be something that a deontologist thinks is wrong because, you know, if you start lying, then you're that's, you know, Kant would say that you can't universalize lying as like an ethic because it degrades language, and you would never be able to trust anybody, and you would never be able to rely on anything that anybody is saying if you accept that lying is sometimes okay. So we should never lie, right? That's an absolutist position. But a consequentialist might say that like there are situations where you could lie and that's good. But if you take consequentialism to its extreme, right, then and utilitarianism specifically, then what you're saying is there are situations where the reality of it doesn't matter as long as someone is feeling good, right? And Robert Nozick tries to refute this with the experience machine thought experiment. And the idea is essentially, if you could go into a simulated world that felt as real as our world does, and you would forget that you were in that world, but in that world you got to do everything, you got to live your literal best life. If you want to be a mountain climber, you can go be a mountain climber. If you want to read every book that the world has ever seen, then you can read every book. If you want to have like the perfect family, then you get to have that. And he asks the question, would you go into that experience machine? And his conclusion is, no, of course a person wouldn't go into that, into the experience machine, because there's something inherently good about living an actual life and things not being simulated, right? So he thinks that the experience machine proves that we would prefer reality. And the more people that play video games and consume media, and with the preponderance of virtual reality, it seems to me like he's wrong. Like, I don't think that it's true that most people would turn down the possibility of the experience machine. And the Matrix, I think, is probably directly derived from the thought of the experience machine, right? Would you stay in the Matrix, or would you leave the Matrix if you found out that you were in the Matrix, right?
Yeah, you're correct. It connects to VR a lot, because like pulling from the Matrix specifically, and I guess in a way the experience machine, the bad guy from the first movie, the bald dude, he's having that whole speech while he's eating steak, and he's talking about how the steak is completely just ones and zeros, pixels, everything just tricking the brain into things are zapping the brain to trick it into thinking it tastes like steak, but it could taste like chicken whenever they wanted. He fully explains it out, and he's like, fuck it, I want to be in the machine. And that's why he ends up, spoiler alert for the Matrix 1, that's why he ends up like selling out his homies, and bad things happen, and he sides with the agents, whatever. He wants to just like continue living in the experience machine, but this time being like a king in that machine, I guess. As for like, do I think people would turn down the experience machine? Like, probably not. I don't know. Like, I feel like to get to a point where you would have a bunch of people saying like, no, I wouldn't pick my best life, is if you had one of those cheesy like end of Wonder Woman 84 scenarios where it's just like, the truth is all you need, and then fucking nothing happens.
Yeah, and there's also like the idea that we're already in a simulation, and so for some people it's like going to an abstracted reality. Who knows how many experience machines we've already been in? Potentially we're in the actual real world, whatever that really means. But if we are in some kind of simulated world, then the possibility of going into a more like a deeper simulated world, it's like Inception, it's like nested within, like they're like Russian dolls that are nested within each other.
Yeah.
But you're getting farther. The more you go into the abstract world, the farther you are from whatever the truest sense of reality is.
Thankfully, though, with virtual reality, you are like willingly taking the leap every time you go into it, whereas in movies like Inception, they're like tricking someone by making them go to sleep and then they go into their dream. Like, virtual reality is very much not a dream state. It is this thing that more often than not, you need to put a little extra like mental effort into getting into. Because like you're putting this sort of not heavier, but this thing that does have some weight, you're putting it on your face. You got to grab the controllers. You got to set up your play space. These are all things that at least build up this like reality transferring ritual.
Right. So that they're grounding you in your reality.
In a sense, yeah. In a sense, like those steps you take to like put on the controllers and then put on the headset, those are like your last totems in reality, unless you like set up some sort of alarm clock or something outside to like pull you back. But like, by no means are you getting lost in there. It's just I'm saying more so from the practical sense of like, hey, I only want to play for half an hour. You can so easily lose track of time in there. And as a player, I am finding myself more and more always wanting a real world clock when I'm playing a VR game. And as a developer, I'm now becoming way more conscious of the outside world alongside like the virtual world happening.
Okay, so there are video games where, as like someone playing the game, there is like a video game within the video game world, right? Or like there are video game developers in the video game. I'm curious, could you ever imagine a situation where you would put on your like VR headset and then your character would then go into a VR world within that VR world? Would that be just like silly and like kind of redundant, or would there be any virtue to that, like gameplay wise?
There could totally be virtue. There's several virtual reality experiences and or games out there that center around putting on more VR headsets. So there's an experience called Accounting. It's made in part by Justin Roiland's game studio, I think Squanch Tendo, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so they made accounting, and in that you're doing accounting by putting on like different VR headsets. So it's like, oh, put on your accounting VR headset. Oh, put the cartridge for accounting in the headset so that it loads up. And you do that more and more, going to different worlds and shit, and it's very weird. At some point you end up like in a courthouse. Like the VR headset turns off, well, the one in game, and you have to take that off your head, and then you find out you're like in the middle of a courtroom on trial for murder because you murdered somebody while in the VR headset doing something in a different world, right? So that idea is totally there, and people like that idea a lot. It's definitely rides off the Inception, like going layers and layers deeper. For a moment, when you talked about meeting with other people, like putting on your avatars and stuff, that sounded like VR chat, but it sounded like you were almost saying like, what if you made VR chat, but within VR chat? That would be interesting. I could see that being a very cool like game mode / like world experience from VR chat. So like what I'm seeing in my head, given what you like explained, is like I play VR chat. This is a social virtual reality program where you think of the movie Ready Player One, but just people talking in a club. So everyone has their own completely like copyright breaking avatar. They're all talking to each other about random stuff, but you can make like user generated games with its own logic. Like people have made kind of like kart racers, almost like Mario Kart within this. So you could totally set something up that could be like, oh, this is like a multiplayer murder mystery. Like let's all put on our VR headsets, and then like you do like a weird mini game in the VR headset, and then you take them off and somebody's dead, and now it's a murder mystery. Yes. Or anything like that. That would be very cool, and it's something that, as far as I know, hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, minigame seems like it would be a rife usage. It's like DK64 and Control both have like arcade machines that the character can walk up to and use, and then it like triggers like a minigame. So yeah, it's just giving you like a kind of like a new flavor, and I could see it being something like if you were playing like if there was some kind of like role playing game in VR, and then you had a consistent character the entire time. And then that character was going to enter like a virtual world where they were like no longer that character anymore. Maybe they were like an alien, and they were going to play an alien minigame or something like that. Okay, there's a question of utility, right? Like how many times can we abstract and it still be like interesting? But there's also like comprehension. Like how far can we abstract it and still understand which world is which, and like keep up with these like different levels of abstraction? And maybe that's not very interesting, but what I guess I want to like pivot to is like what makes this reality feel real, right? Like you were talking about that I love the example that you brought up about the steak, right? Like someone eating steak, and it could just as easily taste like chicken. And if we're like the computer code of our world is chemistry on some level, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we could go even further and reduce, say, like chemistry is based on physics, right? Like, but I guess the question is, what is the distinction what is the meaningful distinction between these simulated realities and the actual reality the level of reality that we live in?
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost is like tangibility. Your reality is like highly dependent on what all your senses can take in and react to, right? So in virtual reality, like you really don't have a sense of touch. Like you just have the haptic feedback on the controllers, but like when you go to touch a table, it's not going to be there. Like punching a character, it's not going to offer you any resistance. Like, yeah, I mean, even like playing a boxing game, like you're not going to get any resistance when you make contact with the other character. So like in those cases, for like those boxing games or sports games where you're like swinging your arms excessively, like you need to be mindful that there is nothing there to counteract your force. This is to help prevent you throwing your arm out or something. So that's like one thing is the sense of touch. That's just the tactile sense that's completely missing from the virtual reality experience. I shouldn't say it's completely missing, because we do have like the rumble feature on the controllers, but that is a very abstract way of letting the player know like, hey, you touch something, or hey, something's reacting to you. So like,
yeah, it's so crude. I mean, it's not actually simulating what it would feel like to touch the table. It's just like letting you know that you're touching something or you're interacting.
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest thing first and foremost, is the lack of touch. And then probably next, at least from my side of things, like building out the world, is creating a space with like consistent logic and logic that like is somewhat relatable. That is to say, if you were making like a fantastical or sci-fi world, like you still wanted to follow like some amount of like real world logic in order for the player to like better settle into that space. You can't throw someone into like MC Escher stairs, but then also make the MC Escher stairs sideways, because it's like a little too jarring. Whereas if at first they're on the platform of an MC Escher staircase, everything's at the right orientation, and you're in that weird middle space, like the cool one in Control, like the black negative space where the big doors are and the bridge. Yeah. So if you start off in there, you could say like, oh, okay, this staircase landing is familiar to me. The stairs are familiar. I see a door. What's not familiar is this big void around me, but that's okay because that's like not touching me right now. I am just on this staircase. And I think like that scenario, you can like trick the player into saying like, oh, this is quote unquote reality. Like there's almost definitely always going to be something in the back of your mind that says I am just in a headset. And that's what activates when you see people get super scared and like throw the headset off their body. It's like that thought in the back of their mind finally like shouts and like they can hear it. Whereas leading up to that, they are only thinking, oh my God, this thing's chasing me. Oh my God, this thing's going to hurt me. Oh my God. And it leads to the screaming reaction up to the throwing the headset off. So like those people have accepted that as much as they can, they have accepted that that's reality. Like kind of almost jumping back to the magic circle, like less on a shared experience level, but more on a individual level. There's, at least I feel, there's like this individual magic circle that people kind of have to put themselves in, especially like when going into VR especially.
Can you talk about the magic circle?
Basically, the circle represents this like communally agreed upon set of rules and assigned values. So the magic circle would be I guess like the arena, the basketball stadium, whatever have you, where the players show up and the audience members show up, and everyone has agreed to showing up to this game. They agree that like scoring points has value. They agree doing a slam dunk has some sort of value, and that's why they all cheer and get hyped or get sad when things play out one way or another. They are now in the magic circle. They all agree like a 3-pointer is a 3-pointer, 2-pointer is a 2-pointer, and this is how the game should be played.
And even more fundamentally, that when the audience members arrive, they will sit in the bleachers and they have assigned seating, and that they will not go onto the court during the game. Like everybody has a role. It's not just like the rules of the game itself, right? It's like
True, yeah.
The mores and the norms that everybody is following, like without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
They're facing forward, like they're facing the players. They are watching the clock, they pay attention.
Good call out. Yeah, so that would be part of the magic circle, is like knowing what your role is within the game, which like, yeah, audience or player, and then, what type of player you are, because you're all, let's again nail in on basketball, right? You got like 5 dudes on the court. They all can do whatever, but they are specifically assigned, like one person's going to be a shooter, one person's going to be a blocker. Same thing for football. Like you don't have to follow this, but when you accept to the magic circle, you are following this rule. Even though you might be a big macho football man and don't want to be in a magic circle, you listening to your captain and your coach puts you in that magic circle.
Okay, so the things that separate VR from like standard reality, our reality, you've talked about the confluence of senses being something in our reality that VR has yet to mimic, and also kind of like there are bugs and broken logic in VR, and then they're like, as long as there is like an agreed upon set of expectations and norms and whatnot in VR, then that's one of the things that can help it to be convincing.
Yeah.
All of these seem to me like technological barriers that will be able to transcend. Like I think that we will be able to integrate tactile sensation very soon, like in our lifetime soon. Like I think the experience machine will 100% be possible.
Yeah.
Like this idea that like what's standing in the way from virtual reality is like a technological limitation rather than a metaphysical one seems really like to have interesting implications. And I'm curious, do you share the intuition that we will be able to simulate reality basically perfectly, convincingly? And what do you think we should do about that? Is that something we should be alarmed by? Is that something we should appreciate? Are there certain risks that we should be aware of, or a potential addiction, or maybe what we don't know what this is going to do to the brain, because we haven't had any generations of people who have like used VR in the long term? Or are those just kind of like panicking for no reason?
I would say part of it is definitely panicking for no reason.
Doctors used to recommend cigarettes, though. What the hell?
Yeah, and Coke used to have cocaine in it. Now they just want to put coffee in it. What a world we live in. But
do they have coffee and soda now?
Coca-Cola has this was on Twitter like the other day. Coca-Cola has released a variant with coffee in it.
Wow, I need to take a minute. That's my change of heart is I like Coca-Cola now. Holy crap, that's so nuts.
Okay, that was quite a few questions, and I'll try to answer them the best I can. I think on the addiction front, like, with most things that will bring people joy or trigger a dopamine rush within the user's brain, I think, and any of that stuff can be abused and get addicted to. I personally have a hard time like seeing that happen because of how much, like, maybe effort isn't the right word, but it's the sort of physical hurdle and the physical exertion that goes into like going into VR or playing a VR game, depending on what the game is. I feel like that is something that like takes enough work that you aren't really going to end up addicted to it.
People are addicted to shopping and gambling and things that are, and that also gets into the like, I guess like philosophy of mind of like addiction, which, there's like a value theory component to that. There's a metaphysical component of that, but that's really like kind of a tangent. We could talk about video game addiction for its own episode and stuff like that. So maybe that question is a little too loaded.
Yeah,
for right now.
I don't even know if it's specifically video game addiction, dude, because like virtual reality has so many other applications. Like the first thing I thought of, honestly, was like some sort of like sex addiction, like somebody who's already addicted to porn or something gets into VR porn and is like, oh, I can't do anything lower fi than this. And even worse, maybe they end up like locking themselves off for like long periods of time because now they're in the headset just like on porn all day. I think that's more the route I can see with the addiction, is like other people's addictions being exacerbated by the higher level of like immersion. There's no interactivity. These are still movies, mind you. There are like, adult rated games out there and things like that, but they are by no means some sort of like Carmen Electra dating simulator type thing. They are very rudimentary dating simulators.
It sounds like you're saying that VR is a tool that enables addiction rather than it is the thing that people are addicted to.
It's a tool that can. I want to specifically say it can enable addiction. It's certainly not guaranteed to.
For sure. Yes.
And it's probably like not a high percentage. I just want to keep that very clear so we don't go all Fox Newsy.
Yes, and I think that we can talk about the dangers of VR without besmirching all of the positives that can come from it too. Like the internet has allowed a ton of people to become addicted to internet porn who may otherwise not have been, but that doesn't mean the internet is bad.
Yes,
like the internet is still probably a net good. I mean, our society is falling apart, so maybe not. I'm not really sure, but that kind of happened with the printing press too, right? It destabilized, like these new inventions destabilize like communities as misinformation is spread. And
so putting the addiction stuff like behind us, first and foremost, I want to say that definitely in my lifetime, the haptics for virtual reality will get better. If anything, I feel like Sony's DualSense controller may help push that side of the innovation. Everyone who's been playing with the PS5 has just told me the controllers are insane. So I think
I'm so sick of hearing about those freaking controllers.
I too am I'm at that cyberpunk point where I'm like, okay, I've heard too much about these things. Now it's overhyped, and I'm just gonna think the controller is trash when I use it.
Yeah, it's just a controller. Like, let's take a breath, okay? Like
that technology can really easily be like shoved into the motion controllers. So I hope they do, and that would actually create some more immersive like stuff for us. The other thing is like, no, I don't, at least in my lifetime, I don't think we will see a like perfect virtual reality, like a, oh my god, this looks so good and it operates with enough player agency and reactivity that it's like a real actual like setting, blah blah blah. I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime. Like that takes,
I am shocked.
that's too much. It's so much work.
I think I might be mad at you. I don't know how I feel right now. Where you're a dreamer. You're supposed to be like completely sold. You're supposed to be speaking to the people on a pulpit, telling them that they need to get VR now, like get it while it's early, and then, you know, decades from now we can talk about how unconvincing it was, and like look how much it's grown, blah 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 blah. You, like, I cannot believe that you are not like leading with your heart in the like, we're just around the corner. That makes me so disappointed in like the state of it, because you understand how this stuff works so well.
I mean, well, that's why I gave the answer I gave, because I now understand the sad realities of certain parts of these things. But like, I definitely don't want to be it's just around the corner guy, because VR has been nothing but it's just around the corner. And I think that's really burned a lot of people who don't even touch VR.
Yeah, same with AI.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I talk to people about VR who either haven't tried it or haven't heard of it really, or like just barely heard of it, they're like, "Oh yeah, I hear," and this is regardless of years. I've been asking for years now, and they'll always say like, "Oh yeah, I hear it's 5 years out from being like ready." And it's like, okay, well, if this is like the pervasive idea, then VR is kind of fucked forever, because everyone's going to keep waiting 5 years for some invisible like blow up to happen. But that being said, like just from a developer point of view, so that the listeners get a really good view of like what it takes to set up anything, let's take a very simple premise. It's two people, the player and a detective. You're in an interrogation room. It's just a solid gray room, has a table in the middle, a chair for you to sit in, a chair for the other guy to sit in. Okay, one, just setting up like, what are you able to do? You're talking about like, let's make something that will trick them into thinking like it's actually reality. The very first thing is wondering like, how is the player going to move around everywhere? Or even deciding, can the player move around this room? Like, you've set up an environment, and if you say they can't move around the room, that immediately is like, this isn't reality, because I can't use my body like exactly how I want to use it. And that's where like the problem starts. And once you program in the ability for them to walk around, then they want to like sit in the chair, and so you got to build in functionality to sit in the chair. I mean, there's plenty of other stuff, but the part in this scenario that becomes the big Pandora's box that will end up taking years of
I guess, is it that all the NPCs have to pass the Turing test?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah. My main point was going to be like making the NPC and the world react to everything you can do, like, or rather like the vast majority of different permutations of player action. So if the player decided, well, one, you need to allow the player functionality and freedom to grab either of the chairs and throw it through the two-sided mirror that's in the room. You gotta then build out the other side of that two-sided mirror room if you allow them to do that. If you don't, you are then breaking their reality because they can't do what they want to do.
Oh, you're such a level designer. Jesus.
And then you have people who are thinking like, oh, I don't want to throw it through the window. I want to throw the chair at the guy so I can get out of here. Or I want to throw it at the light so I could turn the light out and then attack the guy so I could get out of here. Like very, when you present players with a problem, they're going to try to get very resourceful to solve it. And you need to, in order to create a quote-unquote reality, you need a world that is reactive to the player, and if the world doesn't react to the player, that is an immediate sign that it's like artificial. So when you're in virtual reality, now getting to the AI, the actual like detective in this room, oftentimes what we will see in cutscene moments where the player does have control is like the actor in the cutscene doesn't react to anything. They just perform their lines like because it's just an animation file being played. But players, especially if they're like human-like characters and stuff, they want to do things like, or rather they want to test the limits. They want to be like, oh, I know you're in the middle of a very important monologue, but what happens if I like caress your face or pick your nose or kind of tickle your ear? And most of the time they don't do anything. Sometimes I will give like bonus points to games that do this. Sometimes you'll see animations like actually play when you do things like that. So like in Lone Echo, if you touch the only human NPCs, like if you hold their hand or like touch their butt for a couple seconds, they like swat away and they're like, hey, are you okay, dude? So that is like one well-programmed but albeit primitive step forward in that direction. That's where we're at right now, is like, oh, I touched your butt and they programmed you to slap my hand away. That's cool. But you're not really going to react to most other things.
Yeah, I mean, that is really specific. I mean, it's like, if you're specifically touching this tiny hitbox, you know, then it will react differently than every other part of the person's body. I would actually, okay, going back to my guess from before, I would say that I got it wrong, because I was really focused on the domain of consciousness and like whether or not we will, like, I think that we basically have to have convincing soft AI in order to have a perfectly rendered world. You know, if that world is going to be inhabited with people. If you're just playing like VR go-karts, then, you know, you don't necessarily need to have people that are talking. But your point is that and it's very like my groan about you being a level designer is because you're so, you know, rightfully concerned about the logistics and the interactivity of the world. And it's like you're analyzing it on a level that I hadn't even considered, right? Like my thing is like, how are we simulating people? But your thing is, how are we simulating physical environment, which I would put in a completely different box. And I think it's really important. And it's one of the things in video games that really frustrates me when I'm trying to do something and the character is not doing it the way that I want them to do it. It's like an obstacle that can like really like almost ruin a game sometimes, where it's like, I'm just trying to like pick this thing up and you're not even like, you know, like perhaps there are games that will have the same button that mapped to different actions, and if it's not lining up with what you're actually trying to do, that can become really frustrating. This like makes me wonder though whether you think any video games have perfected like environmental reactivity. Like, I know that Breath of the Wild was lauded for like every surface is like climbable, virtually everything, you know, can be interacted with in some way, but that certainly doesn't meet the bar of I can't do anything that I want, right? Like, there are a lot of limitations still. So we're not there yet with regular video games, correct?
Correct, yeah. In terms of like I mean, Breath of the Wild is certainly not like a very fully reactive world. I know it got knocked at times for having kind of like big empty spaces in their Hyrule, and for the technological limitations, like, it makes sense. For virtual reality, it's kind of similar, if not maybe weaker, right? Like, Breath of the Wild was coming out on a Switch, and we all know the Switch is weaker compared to PS4, Xbox One. A Oculus Quest or any wireless headset currently is weaker than that even. They run on various like cell phone components. That being said, the rendering that we can do for these games is like fucking crazy. Like, given the tech they're running on, the fact that you can play some of these games is like, wow. And also, like, looks wise, my own experience leads me to believe that we do not need high fidelity, realistic styled graphics within a VR game in order to like mentally live in that world. Like, there's a game called Windlands. It looks very abstracted, but it has an art style that like I like and colors that I like. I could see myself like, quote unquote, living in that world or believing I'm in that world, maybe more so than like trying to think of like a scary game. Maybe potentially like a Westworld Awakening, because like in Westworld Awakening everything looks like very real. It's the HBO like Westworld. So you're seeing all of that stuff, but the realness of the characters might enter that like uncanny valley, or the fact that it's like trying to replicate something so close to like the real life. It's just, you're really just trying to like put something to a test when I think for the most part you shouldn't. One game I played that made me notably go like, oh, this world is actually reactive. This is cool. I feel like I'm kind of like more in this, was Stormland. One of the Oculus Big 3. Actually, it was the middle child of the Oculus Big 3, Asgard's Wrath, Stormland, and Medal of Honor Above and Beyond. This game is, you play as a robot. It's a hub and spoke style, meaning you have like a safe hub world where you do your upgrades and shit like that, and then you'll like ride an elevator to go into the Stormland, which is like just some kind of open area level that you can glide around, and it's basically a first-person shooter Far Cry with like robots, and it's in VR. So much like Breath of the Wild, like everything in there is climbable. Your robot like can climb everything. It has fluid climbing, so like you can just like drag down, let go, and you like throw yourself up rather than doing like point-to-point climbing. So the game's world is reactive, or rather like why this game's world came out to me as reactive was how many things there were in the environment to engage with for like collectibles, but then also things that weren't collectibles, either hazards or just neutral creatures. So the first of these like neutral creatures I saw was just a plant with some tendrils. Like think of maybe like a rose. Yeah. Think of like a rose flower with like just some like a couple of antennas sticking out of it. When you bring your hand close to the rose, the antenna start to light up and they actually retract back into the rose as if like it's scared of you. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. This serves no gameplay purpose whatsoever. It just helps me like cement myself in the world. Grounding is what some of us call it. So like grounding the player in the world via like I tried to grab this flower, but then it like hid away from me, or how you level up and gain experience to some extent is by picking fruit off of the trees in the world and then squashing those fruit in your hand, and like that's how you like gain the energy.
Reminds me of Ring Fit, like making smoothies.
Yeah, kind of like that. But the big point here being is the connection to the world and the interactivity. So like the connection to the world is like the plant reacting to me, or picking a fruit off of a tree, which then like the tree kind of shrivels up or something like that. But then the interactivity of now I must squish this fruit, or I'm going to try and actually touch the flower and see what it does. Like that to me was like a strong, like, cool, this is like a living world. As far as I have seen, this is a living world more so than other games. Like Half-Life Alyx puts on the illusion of a real living world, but it is very, I mean, if you look around the corner, or if you look in the cracks, you'll see it's very clearly a hard scripted, like linear experience where everything happens on beat for a reason. And Stormland is more of the open world, like let shit happen as it happens and like have fun with it type approach. I could talk, I don't know if this has to do with metaphysics, but I could talk about my experience with like the social side of things. Like remember 360 gaming before they brought like party chats where you just always had to be in the lobby and everyone had a microphone?
Yes.
That's what VR is like right now.
Oh my gosh.
And so I don't know if this has a metaphysical layer, but what the
virtual space is this one?
This is very awkward to bring up and complain about. But one of the changes I've seen between our era of 360 and this new virtual reality era of Bohemian 360 style is that kids are younger sounding individual are way more sexual in their joking, harassing nature. So like 360 days, you'd go into a chat and it would be like, hey, I fucked your mom, ha ha ha, isn't that funny, ha ha. You go into Echo Arena or Rec Room and suddenly you have a high-pitched squeaky voice floating their way to you and then grabbing onto your waist and like violently moving their face in and out of your waist. Like, and you can't push them away. Like, the best you can do is like turn them invisible and block them if they like do that too much.
When you block people, they become invisible?
There are different privacy settings within virtual reality depending on the game you're using, where they will like mute somebody, turn off their avatar, maybe turn off whatever special emotes the avatar has. And yeah, if you're gonna block them, it's full on like Black Mirror style. Like, you just block them, you never see them, they don't show up as like some white static silhouette, which okay, I get why Black Mirror did that, but that's so fucking annoying.
That would be really hard in the eyes. That's so interesting. So in our world, I know that this isn't where you were going with this, but this like really sticks out to me.
Okay.
In our world, when someone is violating you, right? The ways that you can deal with that are by confronting them, by, if it's intense enough, they'll be imprisoned for their behavior, but you could also get a restraining order, right? But so most of those are like legal. Most of your routes are like legal, or like physically, aggressing them yourself or something like that, intimidating them or, something like that. So the law is giving us some kind of control over our space, right? That's part of the reason why we have laws. But in a virtual world, you have the ability to control that space because it is just code, and it can be like copied, cut out of the world that you're in. And I find that to be really interesting, that we have more control over our virtual space than we do over our physical space, and we've had to adapt, with civilizations and, having sets of laws and social norms and all of those kinds of things. But you don't have to have the same kind of conflict resolution in games or the same kinds of like civic protections or, but that also reduces risk.
You pretty much have at least in the example of Echo Arena, you have the community guidelines, right? It's like literally this banner that hangs in the room, which I think is like also very cool. I love stuff that's like that, right? Like, make it feel like an actual public space. It's like, hey, here are the rules for entering this space. Try not to pantomime fellatio on people who don't want it. But like, nobody follows that rule. That being said, yeah, those privacy settings, I guess we'll call them, like the settings that let you change your reality around you, I think it's less about changing the actual environment. I mean, it's certainly impacting reality because you're like removing someone from the equation, but you're not necessarily affecting the actual like digital environment around you. You're just like choosing to reduce the presence of one of those participants, which I think is, the best. I mean, it's pretty much the best way to handle it for now, given what you said about, in the real world, we can't do this. So as humans, we think that we need to figure out conflict resolution or some sort of skill to better handle those situations. But in virtual reality or in gaming in general, now even on social media, you can just click someone and say, block. And like, you remove all the need for conflict resolution, increasing your skill, meeting some sort of like middle ground with another person. And I bring that up, but I don't really know like why. I don't know what point I'm making with that. It's just kind of like an observation.
It's interesting because on one hand, the person who is doing the blocking is kept safe.
Yeah.
And it's good that they are not having to, continue to be bombarded by a person who is doing something inappropriate or non-consensual. But on the other hand, it does feel like it's preventing a certain kind of like resilience and problem-solving skills that you may have to exercise in the real world. And the more time we spend in virtual spaces and the more control and agency we have over our own lives, although we're certainly benefiting in some ways, there are some ways where we're not. And I think that the reason why we are both kind of expressing ambivalence here and don't know the exact point that we're making is because there are pros and cons, and we're trying to like walk the nuanced line, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
To your point about the teenagers becoming more sexual.
Not even teens, dude. I wish it was just teens.
Children?
Yeah, I mean, the voice is enough to know some phase of life hasn't been hit. The voices are high enough, yeah.
And do you think that that's a generational thing, or do you think this technology, or perhaps other technological innovations have given rise to it, or...
I think it's two things. I think it's part generational and part technological, and hopefully I don't sound like a horrible old man here, because I
was going to say, as soon as you start being like, the younger generation is different, it sounds so crotchety and old.
Right, yeah, and that's not the attitude I have. If anything, to me, it still feels like time is progressing as it has been before, but because more risque things are way more in the norm for the younger beings, it puts those taboos, it presses those taboos into like my forefront, because for them it's like it's basic knowledge. Like the technology part is like, obviously, like the headsets are there, it adds a level of anonymity, almost more so than just like the profile pictures and being able to talk. Technologically, they have access to such a more streamlined version of the internet, social media, and all that bullshit. And now here's where the crotchety old man may start to sound off, although I'm going to try not being crotchety about this. Like, porn has certainly entered like the US like pop culture zeitgeist somewhere. I know I'm not just like some crazy Susio boy who has his timeline full of porn. Like, that's not it. Definitely like even as I'm I'm so into YouTube, like I feel like YouTube is partly to like blame for this, and YouTube don't come for me. But like, okay, during the big age of like vloggers, like when David Dobrik and like in large part David Dobrik, but Casey Neistat like brought vlogging to like a big new stage on YouTube. And then when it became more like frat boy vlogging with like the Dobriks and the whoever else, like these channels definitely had audiences of like 8-year-olds to like 15 or whatever and higher, because they're doing these like fun, outrageous things like, oh, we're going to have an actual kissing booth and like all these girls are going to show up and this, that, and the third. And then, but I would notice as a grown ass adult watching these videos that I know kids are watching, I would see, oh, there's this porn star. Okay, interesting collab. Oh, there's another porn star. Okay, this is okay, whatever. And sort of just kind of like seeing that. I mean, okay, so my crotchety sounding thing from that is just like porn stars being included as like entertainer / clickbait spectacle for like younger audiences is a little bit dirty. I don't personally like that, and mainly because it's for a porn aspect, right? Like, let's take like Mia Khalifa, for example. Current day, she is like a sports commentator and some other form of like media entertainer, but she has left her porn career completely in the past behind her. Like, that to me makes more sense on a like video collab for like a younger audience than say Riley Reid, who is like all porn and like very much her image is like hardcore porn. This seems like really off the topic of things, but bringing it back to virtual reality and what I have experienced in like multiplayer games, the anonymity of the technology that virtual reality presents, combined with the more prevalent and or accepted sexualization or sexual aspects of US society, I believe those two have worked together to lead to moments in online lobbies where 10-year-old Squeaker Billy is like, ha ha ha, I saw Josh Dubs do this on VR chat, and pretend they're like sucking my dick.
Okay,
like,
that sound effect was so much.
That is the sound effect you fucking hear. That is literally it. And Josh Dubs is a YouTuber. I'm not blaming him for this. That's another thing too, with like virtual reality, it being newer, at least on the content creation side. Like, there are certainly thoughtful like content creators out there talking about VR, and maybe this is just more to say about YouTube, But the biggest like popular VR channels are definitely the ones that are following the like 2009 PewDiePie Let's Play formula, which is to say, like, get scared, talk really loud, like, be extra exaggerated because, haha, loud man funny.
There's an essay that I really want you to read.
Mm-hmm.
That's by David Foster Wallace. That is about like the porn industry. He like attends the. I can't recall what they are called, but it's like porn awards basically. It's like the Grammys for porn.
The AVNs, yeah, the adult video somethings.
Yes, thank you. Wow. The AVNs, yes. So he attends that and he writes like a journalistic piece about it, and you can probably like hear it. It's very, very, very long. So I would encourage you to listen to it because you will probably get bored if you try reading it, but it is super interesting and he just has such a great level of awareness.
Is it Big Red Sun?
Big Red Sun is correct. There's a YouTube video that's called David Foster Wallace Reads Big Red Sun. It's 2 hours long.
I see that.
It's subtitled His 1998 Visit to the Adult Video News Expo. Yes, Big Red Sun. So highly recommend. It's so worth the 2 hours. It's really exhausting. I listened to it in chunks, but I think I've heard it twice. Anyway, let's change our hearts. I found something really interesting that I didn't mention earlier that you in something you said. You were talking about like immersion in virtual space, and you said that like the art style doesn't necessarily have to be realistic for you to be immersed in it, and there's kind of like I assumed that a convincing virtual reality would have to basically be realistic. Like the art style would have to be realism. But that doesn't like, I understand that you can, like when I'm playing Sea of Thieves or Deep Rock Galactic, like those, I think of both of those as kind of having the same kind of cartoony element to them. I think cartoon realism is what you've described them as in the past. And, it's not like I don't know that I'm looking at like a cartoon, but I know that there is a certain consistency in the presentation of the space, and it would be interesting for me to experience something hyper cartoony but with a lot of interactivity, and I'm curious to see how immersed I could be. As we've discussed in the past, I think you have a higher proclivity to like immersion in media than I do, and I think that's one of the reasons why you're so drawn to VR. And so I'm curious about my own like threshold, like how realistic does something have to look, or can really anything that's extremely interactive make me feel grounded in that space?
Yeah, and I don't know why, but I always feel bad when I think I don't have anything to change my heart over. But I think I am actually chained in this case to one of my opinions, which will have to bounce off of what you just brought up. My opinion is that reality is really like whatever the person...
You have no metaphysical thought. You've had no new metaphysical thoughts this whole conversation?
I probably have. No. Like, I have had new thoughts, certainly. But in terms of, like, changing my own opinions on something, my own opinions on things probably haven't changed. But I've certainly gained, like, brand new understanding to, like, a lot of different things. And I think you've actually helped, in this conversation, reinforce my opinion that reality... God, what am I trying to say? Because keep in mind, like, the last 6 months to like 4 years really puts this statement into a lot of like weird places.
I love this.
There is an observable reality and an accepted reality. My chained opinion is that a player's accepted reality can be whatever it wants to be as long as the player is willing to accept that observed reality as their own reality.
Epistemic relativism is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, what I'm specifically trying to say is the headset's not on right now. You look around you. This is your observed reality. You can touch things, you can taste things, all that jazz, right? And if you are okay with all of this, if you think all of this looks reasonable, then you are accepting that as your reality. It is now your object, it is now your observable reality and your accepted reality, right? Once you put the headset on, you have a new observable reality. It hits, like, most of your senses except for like taste, smell, and touch.
For now.
For now, yes. And from there, your observable reality is like not exactly on par sensory wise, and it may not be on par in terms of like visual fidelity. But let's say you went into Care Bears VR and you were like the biggest Care Bears fan in the world, like literally you just like wished you could have lived in like the Care Bear universe. If you observe that reality and it follows all the Care Bear rules that you know of, like the bears aren't floating in the air because gravity works as like Earth's gravity does. When the Care Bears like hug, their stomachs glow, and that follows Care Bear lore, whatever. If a user sees this, like I'm more cemented to the opinion that like somebody can willingly say like fuck it all and like accept that weird wacky Care Bear world as their reality, not in a lifelong sort of way, but in a like I'm totally losing myself to the game here. I love this world. It has all the colors and the characters I like, and like it has just the right amount of interactivity to let me like accept this as real for the time I'm playing it. That's my like big hard belief.
So that reminds me of like there was this guy George Barkley who he was like a bishop, I believe, and definitely some kind of like clergyman, and he put forward a belief in metaphysical idealism, which is essentially the idea that like the world is only in existence because consciousness gives rise to it, essentially. So, you know, like the question, like if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, right? The answer to he would answer that with what tree, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the tree does not exist unless it is perceived.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was religious, he, you know, like wound up saying that like the reason why the world is like stays the same, you know, if I like go back into my bedroom, I see that my bed is there even though nobody is around. He says that God is like perpetually perceiving the world, and that's kind of why things are able to be static and whatnot.
Hang on.
I love that you're amused.
Hang on, let me explain why that's so fucking funny. I hope this doesn't get me like really hated. So God is watching everything. Okay. Depending on how the game works, where your camera is looking is where the game is loaded, right? So that's what this guy is operating off of. He's like, oh, okay, so when I leave my bedroom, the bedroom isn't loaded in the game because I'm not looking at it, but God's looking at it, so he's always got the bedroom loaded. Oh, he's always looking at Brooklyn, so Brooklyn's loaded. And the reason this is fucking hilarious, and the reason it's like funny on the game dev level, is because we don't render those out to save like energy and space. Your console, your whatever would absolutely, I mean, the game itself just wouldn't run if it was perpetually loading like everything at all times. Like things need to be swapped away. Like when you leave Brooklyn and go up to Manhattan, despawn Brooklyn. Like you don't need NPCs in Brooklyn, you don't need cars in Brooklyn. Same with this guy's example. Like when you leave your,
but that's a working memory problem, right? Like we don't have the technology to be able to allow all of those things to be running at the same time. But like if God is this, like, you know, like let's just give him,
even if we did, we wouldn't though. That's probably my big thing, right? Is the efficiency of it. Why would God do something so unoptimized?
Well, because
as to render everything in. Like if you have like so much power, you would want to like even as the consoles get stronger, we still are optimizing all that shit so that like we're still unloading parts of the world so that we can load in more stuff, and if anything, stuff at better, higher fidelity and functionality.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking like, damn, if God is like the Xbox Series like Z, that where I'm just like, but then why are you working so dumb, God? Like you don't need to load everything. That's just me. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, I mean that's so interesting. I've always conceived of the like omniscience of God as a effortless maneuver, and like it's so funny to think about it in like how much work is he exercising to be, you know, to be like omnipresent, you know? It's like it's such an interesting idea. But yeah, so anyway, going back to the metaphysical idealism though, it sounds like you're kind of maybe saying the reverse of this. You're saying that like if someone is in the Care Bear universe, they are Well, okay, would you say that they are bringing the Care Bear universe into existence by virtue of perceiving it, and then also, which I would say is the metaphysical idealism component, and then you're kind of making a value judgment on that, which is that world by virtue of that person being immersed in it. There's a certain kind of like relativism that you're advocating for, that like that world is just as relevant or important as to that person as like this current reality is to me, and we should kind of be free of judgment in terms of saying that like this world is better. Am I kind of getting at what you're saying?
Pretty much everything except for probably that very last part, because I just don't want to make any definitive statements for like VR is better than real life or real life is better than VR. Everything is an ecosystem that needs to like work in tandem, right? So like somebody,
so you're agnostic on the value part of it, is that right?
No. At least I don't think I am. I'm just trying to say it's less value than what you're talking about. Your example to me reads like someone is going to kind of forsake their real world life in order to stay in the headset and like keep being in Care Bear world. I would say yes for an individual who is like unwell in a way. Like again, going to the addiction point we talked about earlier, like it goes back to somebody like not being satisfied with like life, that more likely than not drives them to do those things. So in this case, it would be like somebody who is really depressed, doesn't have much going on in life. In your example, they see Care Bear world and they're like, wow, this is far better than anything else. I'm just going to wear the headset like little more and more every day. That's like them trying to escape their problems. Like my utopian ideal would be VR and real life pretty much cohabitating, and in a way being able to have them as like intertwined separate worlds.
So if someone is averse to the real world because they're so deeply entrenched in consuming media of any kind, then we would say, okay, that's a problem. This person, especially if escapism is the reason, I think. But if someone is at the other end of that spectrum and they're like averse to consuming any media, they won't read, they won't listen to music, they won't watch TV, they won't do anything, that would also seem to be very odd to us. It's like, why is this person so averse to experiencing art, or like what do they find so valuable? I guess it just wouldn't make sense to me. Perhaps I don't want to really make a normative claim that it's necessarily unhealthy, because there are people like Buddhist monks who aren't like chilling with TV and like they're doing really well, by their own standard. But the idea of having balance in your consumption seems to be something that you're highlighting. The question that I have though is, before I was comparing me in the real world to the person who's always in the Care Bear universe. What about, let's just take the person who's in the Care Bear universe and they get out of the Care Bear universe. Do you think that their worlds are equally valuable? Do you think that their experience of reality is equally valuable when they have the headset on and when they have the headset off?
I think from like a factual standpoint, no. From a subjective user experience standpoint, it could fluctuate.
So which one of those is more important to you?
The factual. Okay, definitely, yeah. Like the physical, tangible world that I, to my current day and year of living, have decided to accept as real and not just some sort of wild virtual reality simulation. I think, we're better off subscribing more value to this realm than we are to a digital realm, a virtual reality realm. I think that's the way to go, using the same kind of guiding light that I have used regarding sinking money into digital goods, spending too much time in like, I don't know, any one particular thing, besides Rocket League, of course. But like for most of the games I play or anything I do, like if I hit a certain amount of time, I really start to like question the value of that thing. So like right now, I think like virtual reality, it can help train us, it can help us learn things and this, that, and the third, but it's certainly at this point in time is it does not have enough functionality to be as valuable as like regular life experience itself. One could make an argument for way down the road when virtual reality becomes ubiquitous and there are infrastructures tucked in there to make things easier, like maybe having a virtual reality app version of Instacart that like allows you to shop in a virtual grocery store, so you actually get
that would be so cool. Oh my gosh.
Right? It sounds so mundane and stupid. Like if you're a listener and you just said, "What? You want me to shop in virtual reality? Are you dumb?" Trust me, when you get the headset on and you're holding the shopping cart, it's gonna be fun. I really don't know what it is with virtual reality, but it makes the most mundane activities fun. And that's why The Simpsons called it in in one episode. They go to basically CES, the Consumer Entertainment Show. They go there and you see virtual reality and it's just a kid doing mowing the lawn. It's like chore simulator, and he's like cutting the hedges, and you see in VR he's just cutting hedges and he's got a little hat on. It's totally
great.
what people like in VR, and I think that is the case. As a small tangent, I think that's the case because VR goes one of two ways. It goes either like over the top crazy, like you can't do this anywhere else, or it's like, what if real life was in VR, and isn't that quaint? And those both have such good feelings, honestly.
Cool. Well, I think that's a wrap. We covered a lot of ground today, my man.
Yeah, whole lot of meta, whole lot of physics, whole lot of the metaphysics.
Thank you for listening to Deep in the D-Pad. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share us with your friends.
For updates and discussion, follow us on Reddit at r/deepinthedpad, Facebook at deepdpad, and subscribe to Deep in the D-Pad on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the bell.
And if you want to ask us questions or get a chance to share your own D-Pad delight on the show, email us at askdeepinthedpad@gmail.com. Be sure to put question or delight in the subject line.
Big thanks to 8-Bit Jazz and Kevin MacLeod for supplying the music for the show.